Hello, everyone. This is Parrish Alford with the Daily Journal. I'm joined by Logan Lowery, our Mississippi State beat writer, and this is Double Coverage, a production of the Daily Journal. We're glad you've chosen to click in with us today. It is opening week in college football, even though they had those week zero games last week. Logan, here's an interesting thought here. I like watching college football. Okay, so I looked a little bit at the week zero games, and I noticed that New Mexico State played last Saturday and lost, okay, to Wyoming. And they also play Thursday. So New Mexico State will have the opportunity to be 0-2 before most teams in America have kicked off. So that's pretty interesting, don't you think?
Yeah, it is. And I watched a little bit of the Jacksonville State game this past. I know it wasn't, it was an FCS game, but I watched a little bit of it just to have some football on. And I've been tuning into a few NFL preseason games. But yeah, I spent last weekend. It was really our last weekend off, probably till I guess after Thanksgiving, pretty much. I mean,
Till Armageddon, our last weekend till Armageddon.
Yeah. So basically, I tried to get some stuff done here around the house, some last minute little projects and stuff because like I said, we're going to be on the road, a good bit over the next few months. You hit the road, and I guess you're hitting the road tomorrow. So you got a lot of trips to Houston.
Yeah, going to the Lone Star State twice this season, so a lot of miles.
Exactly, and I definitely crack. From this past year with baseball and women's basketball and such, I'm a gold member at both Marriott and Enterprise Rental Car. So I've done a lot of traveling this past year. Probably going to rack up a lot more even this year. I expect Mississippi State's men's basketball to be even better.
Oh, the Rebels open against Texas Tech. That's Saturday morning at 11, an ESPN game at NRG Stadium in Houston. Matt Luke, his players, pretty excited to open with an FBS opponent, a Power 5 conference opponent in Texas Tech. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Logan, Mississippi State opening with Stephen F. Austin. A little bit of drama coming out of Stephen F.'s camp with a coaching resignation and an interim kind of pushed in there. I mean, that was even a smaller window than the Hugh Freeze resignation last year that led to Matt Luke's interim season as coach. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. Logan, let's talk a little bit about opening weekend in general and in the SEC. I saw a stat flash across Twitter earlier this week that said 6 or 7 SEC teams still had not named a quarterback. And of course, it seems like only Alabama hasn't named a quarterback. We hear so much about that competition. Alabama, of course, will open with Louisville at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. And look, man, you get this deep in camp, you know who your quarterback is. What's the point of dragging it out? What kind of competitive advantage are you gaining by not naming a quarterback at this stage of the game?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a mystery, and I just got through dealing with a coach that liked to keep things dangling like that over it. I remember a few years back, Mississippi State, with Dan Mullen, he didn't want to name who his starting quarterback was, and he didn't want to name who his backup was. I mean, it was just a trickle down effect. Several different years that, not knowing who the star. I remember, Nick Fitzgerald's, first year as the starter that year. Didn't know who was going to run out there the first snap, and it ended up being Nick Fitzgerald. I think he ran the first 2 series against South Alabama, didn't get the job done. I don't even think they got a first down, and then he puts in Damian Williams, and he plays pretty much the rest of the way at quarterback, and Mississippi State ends up losing that game. And then the next week he runs out Nick Fitzgerald for the duration. So I don't know what advantage it definitely didn't give Mississippi State an advantage in that South Alabama game a couple of years ago. So. And of course, Mississippi State's not in Alabama, and but I don't know why Nick Saban hadn't named a starter yet.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think the starter is named in his mind, so to speak. I think that a lot of those stories are already written. I'm looking for Tua, whose last name I won't even try to pronounce, but I think we'll see him as the starting quarterback for Alabama. Logan, if you haven't named a starter by now, then it seems like that would really have an adverse effect on your preparation because somebody's got to be getting those number 1 reps. But the other thing about opening weekend is you have some interesting matchups, especially with these neutral site games. Alabama and Louisville, as we mentioned, Miami and LSU will play out in Arlington. Auburn and Washington are playing somewhere, but you also have a lot of the FCS games. And, I know that all of the Big Ten fans who are watching and listening right now are rolling their eyes over this, Logan, because that's their knock on the SEC is scheduling, is the fact that so many SEC teams do play an FCS opponent. But, hey, I think there are a lot of benefits to playing that FCS game. We can get into that. But let's talk about the timing of it. Mississippi State obviously has it for the opening game. So does Georgia with Austin Peay. South Carolina playing Coastal Carolina. But is that a good thing, or should that game come a little later on the schedule?
Well, I think, for different teams have different needs. For Mississippi State, of course, the time this game was already scheduled long before Joe Moorhead was named the head coach. But I think the timing couldn't be any more perfect for Mississippi State because, they're switching to a brand new offense. They've got a brand new defense. They're switching back to the 4-3. So they've, got a lot of changes. Even though they got a lot of the same personnel on both sides of the ball, they're running new schemes. And, I think that first week's going to be beneficial to them, working out all those kinks that come with first games and changing new offenses and new defenses and things like that. But, another thing is it's going to give those this new freshman rule, this new redshirt rule, an opportunity to get some of those guys onto the field early and reward some of those young players that, they may not see the field for the rest of the season. They've got 4 games to work with there, but, get them out there and get them on the field, get those first game jitters out of the way in a game that, you should be able to win pretty heavily in and, can go ahead and build some of that confidence moving into the rest of the season because you never know what type of injuries or anything like that may happen later on down the road. So go ahead and get those guys, get those first game jitters out of the way. It's here at home. Mississippi State should be able to roll. And then, we haven't talked about it yet, but obviously Nick Fitzgerald, Mississippi State starting quarterback, is suspended for that game. So you're going to have
be rolling in that game.
Yeah, exactly. So, we're going to have a, Mississippi State's backup quarterback who started the bowl game and won the bowl game, Keaton Thompson, last year. So, it's going to be an opportunity not only for Keaton to get some reps early in the year, but, figure out what the backup situation is. Joe Moorhead was asked about that the other day, and it's Jalen Maiden, who's a true freshman, and then you've got a walk-on in Logan Burnett, who's a redshirt sophomore. So, those guys could get some reps later on in that ball game too, and that could prove invaluable later on down in the season. So, for Mississippi State, I think this FCS game, if you have to play one, it comes at a great opportunity to get that done opening week.
Well, I'll tell you, I like the FCS game, generally speaking, because I think the season is demanding. It is physical. We hear the word grind, and it is often overused, but there is that routine of constant pounding. Coaches try to take it easy in practice as they can, but a game, there is a physical toll to a football game. I think it's okay to have the FCS game. Personally, I like to see it come later on the schedule. Ole Miss will play Southern Illinois next week, still kind of early, but a lot of teams will play that game in November. Ole Miss has before, and you get a chance while you're talking about looking at positions right now that maybe are still competitive and getting some reps for some guys that you may need down the road. I like the idea of the game being in November, and it's not an open date. As Michigan can attest, you think back to the Appalachian State-Michigan game, you think back to the Ole Miss-Jacksonville State game in 2010. It's not an open date. You do have to respect the opponent, and there's a lot of talent at the FCS level. There's not a lot of depth. But if that game comes around in November and you've taken care of business as the FBS team, it's a chance for you to exhale a little bit. It's a chance for you to rest your starters who really need some rest going into the stretch, the last few games of the season with so much meaning for so many teams in those games. So, I also like the FCS game from the standpoint of getting kids on campus. Look, we talk about the demands on the football team. It's demanding for the fans who are season ticket holders and who might be driving in from 2 hours or more away. and they're wanting to spend time on campus, and they're spending money, and maybe they're tailgating or they're spending money inside the stadium. There are demands on the fans. It's okay for them to take a Saturday off as well. And when they do, that puts more tickets in circulation for kids who, like myself at a young age, didn't have access to college football every weekend. So more tickets in circulation, more kids invited to games, more kids get on campus, get into these stadiums that they see on TV. Lots of good things come from the FCS game. Personally, I like to see it in November. Let's move along a little bit, Logan. Press conferences on Monday. The first one for Joe Moorhead as head coach of Mississippi State. What did you learn other than the Nick Fitzgerald suspension?
Well, I learned a lot in Joe Moorhead's opening statement, and we really were, thrown off guard. We weren't expecting, there's always some suspension news, that first game of the season, and in years past with Dan Mullen, that announcement was made right before kickoff. Bill Martin, Mississippi State's SID, would walk around and he would say, look, here's the guys that are suspended for today's game, and I mean it would be literally minutes before kickoff. And Joe Moorhead addressed that, in his weekly press conference on Monday. So, on a 6-day start, 5 or 6 days ahead of time, we know who's suspended. It's Nick Fitzgerald, the quarterback, Mississippi State senior defensive tackle Corey Thomas, who's probably going to be a starter, opposite of Jeffrey Simmons at defensive tackle. He's going to be suspended for 1 game. And then, of course, Michael Story, who we talked about a little bit last week, who was suspended. Is indefinitely suspended for animal cruelty, the Ripley native. So, we don't know if we'll see him at all this season. But, for the first game, those 3 guys will not suit up in that game. And, and like I said, we learned that in the opening statement. And Joe Moorhead released a lot of information, talked about a scholarship for walk-on long snapper Joel Baldwin in his opening statement, who's from Tupelo. So a lot of news came out from that opening statement that he had. And then, of course, he ran through Stephen F. Austin, their offense, their defense, their special teams. Went through all of that in his opening statement. And really by the time he finished his opening statement, really weren't a whole lot of questions left to be asked. There was I asked a question about the punting situation because he still hasn't named a punter. He was looking for consistency was what he was wanting to see from the punter, and Cody Schexnayder and Tucker Day were kind of battling it out between camp, and Tucker Day ended up winning that battle. He was the #1 punter coming out of high school 2 years ago. Spent the first couple of games as Mississippi State's place kicker last year before Jace Chrisman came on and took that role away. So, really probably should have redshirted Tucker Day last year. They thought he was going to be the place kicker, so they trotted him out there as a true freshman, and he didn't do so hot in those first couple of games as a place kicker and never saw the field again. So really didn't get a whole lot out of that first year for Tucker Day, but now he's in that role that he was actually recruited for at punter and won the job. So he's going to be a starter and, I guess should be for the next 3 years or so. So I guess you kind of have to weigh those options. But, Tucker Day's got a big leg, and we'll see him on Saturday. Even though Joe Moorhead said he didn't want to have to go to the punter a whole lot. He didn't want to have to see him very much. But he did have some confidence in Tucker Day running him out there. And, that's really kind of the news that came out of the day was just that. And another thing Joe Moorhead talked about, kind of going back to the FCS thing, he talked about his experience as an FCS player and an FCS coach, just how big these games are for those programs like that. It's a chance for them to play in a big stadium on television against, the highest level of competition. And he talked about, he coached at Fordham for 4 years, and he won 2 of those ball games against FCS or FBS teams. He beat Army 1 year, he beat Temple another year, and just what monumental wins those were for his program moving forward. So he used the phrase, he's got his antenna up as far as the FCS schools. He's going to take them seriously. They're not going to be caught off guard at all because he knows how big a game that is for these schools to come into an SEC atmosphere and try to win a game like that.
And it's a big game for these schools, Logan, from a money standpoint too. So much money in the in the FBS, so much money in the SEC, millions. It's not that way everywhere. It's not that way at FCS. I went to a 1AA school. I can tell you about that. But when you go and play these games, you come back with a paycheck that can fund a lot of things. So it's important in that regard too. No suspensions at Ole Miss for the first game, Logan, and really no injuries to speak of, though Ken Webster, it was interesting to pick up the first depth chart and see the senior at number 3 at cornerback. I think that situation will take care of itself when his health returns. He may get a few snaps against Texas Tech, but the hamstring is still bothering him. But aside from that, DeMarcus Gregory, a freshman who has been out a while after ankle surgery, is still out. Probably moving toward a red shirt with DeMarcus Gregory, but the typical injuries of camp, this pull, that strain, those things, most of them hamstrings, those have mostly cleared up. So the Rebels mostly healthy for this first game against Texas Tech. Sincere David, who has worked his way to number 2 on the depth chart at defensive tackle, may be limited, but even David, Matt Luke said, could get as many as 20 snaps if needed there. So the Rebels mostly healthy going into this game. Looking at that first depth chart, not a lot of surprises. I think the way it played out was kind of in keeping with the reps that we saw in practice, and we see a little bit more at Ole Miss than you do at Mississippi State. Not nearly enough, mind you. We don't see a lot of 11 on 11, but we do get to see which units players are running with, whether that's first team or second team, and the depth chart was kind of in line with what we were seeing. The linebacker free-for-all is at a conclusion, it looks. And Logan, at this staff, Luke and defensive coordinator Wesley McGriff, have said repeatedly that they're going to play the best players. Now, you hear coaches say that a lot, but it looks like a commitment to try to get better on defense with youth from this coaching staff. 3 of the top 5 linebackers are either redshirts or true freshmen. The 4th, Mohamed Sanago, who will start at middle linebacker, had very little line of scrimmage experience last year as a true freshman, played on special teams. So a lot of young guys in the linebacker roles for Ole Miss. Of course, the starters will be Sanogo and Cavante Ruggs, a true freshman and outside linebacker. And then behind them, middle linebacker Jaquez Jones, a true freshman, a redshirt freshman, Zacharion Baker also back there, and Willie Hibbler, a junior, which means they haven't completely discounted the older guys, and Hibbler has done enough to earn that second spot on the depth chart. And some other guys, some other young guys sprinkled around as well. And it's not just freshmen, but newcomers who are junior college transfers as well. Keep an eye on Tariquius Davis. You know, I'll just call him Tariq. Excuse me, Tariquius Tisdale. Tisdale just joined the team right at the start of camp, so everything is new and different for him. But you can tell that they have prepared him for a role. They rushed him right away into some key second-team reps. He got a lot of first-team reps. They like this guy at 6'5", 280, a playmaker at Northwest Community College, to come in and help set the edge in that run game and make plays behind the line of scrimmage as well. I think you'll see him play a lot, and I think you'll see him play early, you know, based on what we were seeing in camp with those guys. One of the things that really was a little bit different from the reps that we saw was at number 2 slot receiver, where Floyd Allen had handled that position most of camp. The depth chart has true freshman Elijah Moore there. Now, lots of praise for Moore in this camp as well. They like what he has done, and they believe he's adapted to new surroundings quickly. But for most of camp, Floyd Allen was that number 2 slot receiver. First depth chart comes out, Moore has jumped it. Moore's 2, Floyd Allen's 3. Bottom line is the number 1 slot receiver is number 1, A.J. Brown, and you want that guy on the field as much as possible. And when he's not, if he's not for an extended period of time, then something has gone terribly wrong. But that was a little bit of a depth chart change there. The kickers, Luke Logan wins the competition there. He'll be the place kicker. That's a little bit of a change from the preseason depth chart, and it's Patrick, and it's a name that that I'll learn as the season goes on, folks. And I'll get back to you on Patrick's name. Starts with an N, lots of vowels in there, but we're not going to butcher it right now and upset his mother. So anyway, that's the Ole Miss depth chart, and the Rebels getting ready for that game against Texas Tech. Logan, there are 11, as we mentioned, top of the program, 11 Power 5 on Power 5 matchups on opening weekend. And, this is big for Ole Miss because you'd like to come away with a win, but you don't want to come away feeling deflated. And the fact is, Ole Miss has taken on a Big 12 opponent, but it's Texas Tech. It's not Oklahoma. Texas Tech has some issues it's trying to correct as well. The Red Raiders were 6-7 last year, and they return a lot of experience on the offensive line and at running back, but they don't at quarterback, and they do not at wide receiver. They returned 10 starters from a defense that was pretty good, so it'll be, I think, a good test for Ole Miss right away. But, the big question is going to be, for the Rebels, can they stop the run, slow the run? And no doubt that Texas Tech, this pass-happy offense, is going to come out and try to establish the run behind a veteran offensive line and a couple of backs who have some experience as well. That will take some pressure off of a new quarterback, whoever it is, probably going to be McLean Carter, but we'll see. He's a 6'5" guy, not very mobile, but protects the ball and makes good reads. So we'll see how that plays out. Cliff Kingsbury, another one of those guys who has not officially named a starting quarterback. But, Logan, this game is important for Ole Miss because, look, both of these teams are mid-level teams in their conference. They're both trying to climb the ladder. And when you face that kind of opponent, you need to win the game. You need to have as many wins in pocket as you can before those toughest stretches of the season come around. So, Ole Miss, I know that Matt Luke said he wants to see his team play fast and confident. Those are the most important things he wants to see. They need to win, too. They need to win this game and come out with some confidence going into week 2.
Yeah, you hear so much, you can sort of consider it coach speak. You hear week 1 that, the coach will say, we're focused on us. It really doesn't matter about our opponent. We're just focused on what we do. And, in most cases, I do consider that coach speak. But in this case, I think it really is Mississippi State. I mean, obviously opening up with the FCS opponent, Mississippi State should be able to roll the ball out there and win that game pretty handily. But they need to build confidence. They need to execute well because they go out week 2 to Kansas State, and that's going to, it's kind of a situation like you just mentioned. Kansas State's not a powerhouse, but it is an opponent like that on the road, a Power 5 opponent on the road in week 2 with a brand new coaching staff and a new offense and a new defense. So Mississippi State needs to be crisp, and they need to look. They can't afford to have a lot of penalties out there Saturday. They can't afford to have a sloppy type game on Saturday. They need to build their confidence up, and they need to be clicking on all cylinders by the time they get to week 2 out in Manhattan. So, I'm looking forward to that trip out to the Little Apple, Parrish. It's one of those places you don't get to a whole lot. And, I don't even know that I've ever been in the state of Kansas. So
you have to go to Manhattan, Kansas on purpose. You're intentional.
Exactly. But I actually got a plane ticket. I'm actually flying into Manhattan, Kansas. I hope I look at the airport thing right. I don't want to end up in Manhattan, New York, and that'd be a totally different trip. And I don't think the Journal will be too happy with me if I miss that ball game. But looking forward to that trip out there and seeing that part of the country.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, Logan. I know that. How do you say his first name? Keaton Thompson played well. They won the bowl game last year. Obviously, Nick Fitzgerald is a starter. Joe Moorhead said as much. When he comes back, he'll resume his starting job. Is there anything when we talk about the offense needing to be crisp and everyone wanting to play well and take confidence from this game moving ahead, is there anything to be made of the fact that backup quarterback is in there and the guy you've been getting number 1 reps with isn't around? And is there a sort of chemistry issue there you think you'll see at the beginning of the game?
I don't think so because Keaton and Nick Fitzgerald both have similar skill sets. They're both running quarterbacks. They're not going to have to change the offense much if at all with their play calling. So it's a similar style quarterback in the game, long, lean, can run the ball, very well. I mean, he ran for almost, I think it was close to 150 yards and a few touchdowns in that bowl win against Louisville in the Tax Slayer Bowl. So, he's the similar style quarterback, and they've known about Nick Fitzgerald's suspension since March. I mean, the violation of team policy happened back in March, so they've known this is going to be a fact. Now we as the media just found out on Monday about all this, but I don't know when the team was told. Joe Moorhead didn't get into all that of when everything happened. But we know the violation happened back in March, and they've kind of been preparing for it, along. But I don't think it was probably necessarily a shock to the team to learn about that on Monday, and they've been getting everybody the same amount of reps, and he talked about they really haven't changed anything up, because of the suspension. Everything's kind of just status quo in camp, and they've been getting both guys ready because Nick Fitzgerald will resume the starting role in week 2, but Keaton Thompson's going to go it's probably as long as he can in that ball game on Saturday, and I'm interested to see if they do get a second quarterback out there, who that would be, whether they get Jalen Maiden and use one of those 4 games that he can potentially play in and still redshirt, if they're going to get him ready in that game, or if they're going to roll Logan Burnett out there. Logan Burnett played in a few games as a walk-on redshirt freshman last year, kind of got at the tail end of a ball game, gave a few handoffs and took a few knees, but he's a guy that's his 3rd year in the program, so he's I guess comfortable out there. So we'll have to see, if the second quarterback takes the field on Saturday, who that will be and just how much playing time they get.
Well, I think violation of team policy is a better way to say that. I think it meets the university's goal of being gray and undefined, unclear. Ole Miss has come out with those suspensions before, and it said violation of team rules. And I always ask Kyle Campbell, the media relations director over there, man, can we get a list of those team rules? Maybe if we had a list of team rules, we could figure out what exactly caused the suspension. Hey, folks, thanks for being with us today for this edition of Double Coverage. We appreciate you clicking in with us for this production of the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal. Come back and join us next week. Logan and I will be back with another round of Double Coverage.